places you're all at. Thea, are you is that like Brooklyn or something there? You get an Airbnb for the week? Okay. So this is the first of our pod hub meetings, or as Matt Corey keeps saying, the pub. Um, we could have shirts made with that if you guys want to. Um, so just got a couple of things that we wanted to go over. Just have a group discussion. The work that we do is so intertwined that essentially what we were doing was a lot of like in the Wednesday pod meeting, then we talk about something, and then I'd be like, okay, I'll let the hub know. And then the next day in the hub meeting, I would be like, okay, so here's the thing that we talked about with the pods. We're going to do this. And then somebody in the design hub would be like, okay, but what about this thing? And then we'd be like, okay, that's a good point. And then the next week, so we're just going to be all here together, one big happy family. Thank you, all of you who have your cameras on so we can see each other's faces and get to know who we're working with. I know a lot of you have never seen some of the others of you. So this is great. The first thing I wanted to talk about today is, as some of you know, Monday this week, Matt Corey drove down here to Fargo and we had a meeting with, so it was Matt and I, my boss, Jason, Mary Jo, and Kirsten from the content division, our VP of technology, Rodney Holm, Aaron Beecher, who my boss answers to. He's also our VP of newspapers. And then Neil Ronquist, who's the publisher in Duluth, to give us a perspective from the papers. And we just talked about a lot of our processes and how we're doing things and discussed some of the things that we are doing right now in what someday feels like the most inefficient way possible. For example, I worked this Sunday night. As those of you who work on Sundays know, the sports sections that we have are often pretty much all the same stories from the FNS Digest. They're just kind of in a different order on each cover and each inside. So it's, okay, here's the 9 stories that we have on the FNS Digest, and here's everybody's 3 sports pages with those same exact stories, just rearranged. And I don't know about the rest of you, but that seems kind of silly and like a waste of time when we could do those pages once and attach them to everyone's e-edition and have them have a local cover. And then here's the 3 pages of the exact same stuff that we put, it's in the order with the sports section. So as a reader's going through the e-edition, it's still like, here's my sports section. I got my Twins. I got my other sports, So we had a discussion about a lot of different things like that. And I'm not going to go into all of the details of what everything was because we're still figuring some of the pieces out. Some of the stuff we talked about might not happen. And I don't want you all to be like, okay, but what about that? And worrying about details of things that we're still figuring out. But it was a very good discussion, a very productive discussion about ways that we can really fix some of our systems and work smarter, not harder, with the goal of then, okay, so if on a Sunday night, we don't have to do 20, e-edition pages that were the same exact e-edition pages everybody else had, now can we take lunch breaks on Sunday and then also get some of the, Monday and Tuesday advance done, get some of that print advance ready, things like that. Just to, again, just sort of be able to tweak our schedule so that we can do things when it makes sense to be doing things instead of, well, now it's time for, I'm working on 2 sports sections tonight. So it's time for me to put the exact same story on here twice, in a different place, things like that. So there'll be more to come on that. As soon as I know things, you'll know things. I've asked for us to move quickly on at least parts of that so that we can start seeing that time savings and making things easier, especially, since Tanner left the design hub, the weekends have been a little bit rough without that. So making those adjustments. And I will keep you all posted as we go through that. So, again, I don't have details to share of everything today, but does anybody have questions on the broad view of that? Okay. All right, well then I'm going to hand you over to Michael for, as promised in the invitation, a discussion about skeletons.
Hey, everybody. Excuse me. I just wanted to see kind of what people's thoughts were on those, if we felt they were helpful, if, they were saving anybody time, anything like that. Um, I know that some of you have put in requests with Alicia to have certain ones made, and I haven't gotten around to those. The reason I haven't gotten around to them is because I wanted to have this conversation first. If we were going to jump on the path where maybe we weren't going to use them anymore, because they do take a little bit of effort to make and make sure that they're correct. So, does anybody have big problems with them? Does anybody really dislike them? If so, if you don't mind telling me why, or if you think that they help as far as there's no surprises, anything like that, I'd be interested in having a conversation.
I have a couple comments.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't use them probably as much as some people, but I find them helpful in general. There are just a few tweaks that might be good for some of the ones with pretty short stories. Having both a head and a subhead seems like a lot. Like I'd rather get a little longer story in sometimes.
Okay, and you mean the story that basically the word count on the skeleton and not necessarily how many words are in the file? Is that correct? Just so I understand.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the length of a story.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if anybody else does this, but sometimes a main head is all you need. Even if it's on the skeleton, I just make a note, no subhead.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if everybody's doing that, but kind of go with what it needs and what fits.
Yep, yeah, there's no problem with the Justin, as you guys see. It's hard to have, a skeleton for every example and everything that an editor can think of. I'll definitely make the ones that have been requested if we feel that this is, saving time, things like that. A couple of the reasons that I bring this up is because just from our normal process switching, we've kind of cut a couple of them out. Like we used to use them on some of the FNS pages, and now we're pushing a little bit more design on those, so we don't use them. So that's a couple that we've cut out of the process already. I know that there's definitely times where editors will come to the pod editor with a design, or this is how we want it to look. And instead of, saying move all the positions around, you just say exactly what you want on there. And both of those are fine too. I just don't want them to be a hindrance. I don't know if anybody has anything to say about if it's faster to adjust the headline initially, or have the designer come back and have a little bit of back and forth about what fits and what doesn't. So that's kind of one of the things that I was intending for these to be helpful for. And also with adding kind of the word count on what fits on the cover, I was hoping that was helpful when deciding where jumps go. Like if it's a really long story but a little bit runs on the cover for whatever position, then we would know that we need a lot of jump space. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily how they're being used, or if they're just kind of getting in the way at this point. I know it's a little bit of hit or miss when you talk to some of the designers too. So
I just want to say, if the headlines aren't being like adjusted for the skeleton, like that's the main advantage. I would say, like as far as like the word counts and the jump space goes, I haven't really found that to be really happening on my end. But if the headlines aren't going to be set up for the skeletons, then that's like the main advantage. If that's not happening, I guess I wouldn't really need them. But when it is,
Okay.
when they are set up that way, it's like way better. Super helpful.
Cool.
That's
Thanks.
all I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest advantage, at least for me. I don't look at the word count as much. It's more just when I can set up the cover with the skeleton, I know that for the most part, chatter between editors and designers will be less. Therefore, it'll just, be more streamlined. And, once that cover's set up, that, for the most part, that should be good to go. And there won't be as much, figuring out headlines and stuff like that. So.
Cool.
I will say from my experience, especially with some of the smaller papers like Worthington, like I find that there are just a lot of limited options where I use like the same skeleton over and over again. And I know there's papers like West Central who prefer that and will basically tell you that. But for like, otherwise, I sometimes feel like I look at the headlines that I'm given and I'm looking, at trying to work headline lengths. And I just feel like sometimes it limits our options for what the designer can do. Because sometimes I think the designer probably could come up with something better if we just gave them reasonably length headlines than if we were than if we were trying to break a skeleton because we're tired of the same thing. So.
Yep. No, I think that's totally fair. Worthington was it snuck up on me a little bit when we switched over to it. So I kind of just gave some for them. They were definitely number one on the list for more options. But like I said, we just didn't want to put a lot of the effort into making those if this conversation went kind of, in a sour direction. So I can certainly get you more ones, and I can reach out to you afterwards about kind of just what would be super helpful for you. I have no problem making more for anybody that needs it, and tweaking some ones here and there. That's no problem. One thing too with some sports ones, a lot of our sports pages are now the same width. A lot of our papers are now the same width. So some of the inside ones, making one adjustment to one can go for a lot of the other papers. That's one way that we're going to try to streamline them too. So there's not as much searching on your guys' end. I'll be able to have like A1 and put, how many stories are on each one. And then we'll have one kind of for inside skeletons for sports, things like that can fit on almost every paper. Matt, you got some? I can't hear you, Matt.
While Matt unmutes himself, I did start a poll. If you all want to click on that and vote on it, please.
I tend to use them when I'm doing individual pubs. I'm working for Worthington or somebody, I'm filling in for somebody on Grand Forks or something. But a lot of the pages I do, I think Thayer today did my Minnesota State page. I tend to not use them there because I know kind of generally I'm doing a 2-story. I've got a centerpiece lead and then I've got a strip story across the bottom. So I just generally write my headlines because I know one's a centerpiece and one's going to go across 6 columns. And as somebody used to do layout, I kind of, that's going to be too long or that'll fit just right, kind of a deal. I can do that in my head. So I think they're useful definitely when you're doing the covers with jumps in the pubs properties. But I think for some of the inside pages, or even like the specialty pages, I know that Lily will do food page and she'll have a 1-story and it's got 7 photos. Well, yeah, then you don't really need a skeleton. It's just, go nuts with the design. And so I think that on some of those, I guess what I'm getting to is not every cover or a cover page needs a skeleton either.
Yep.
So I think if people don't feel like they need to, because sometimes what I found when I was doing Nation World pages, I pick a skeleton and then I have to find the news to fit the skeleton, which that shouldn't be the way you want to do it. You should find the news, and then if you can get what I'm saying. So, and that's why I think what Mary brought up too is a good point. Is and Meredith too, is that the skeleton might call for a 1-column head with a subheadline, 4 decks, and then the story's only 300 words. Well, I want to get a little bit more of the story in. I'll just kill the subheadline.
Yeah.
And just so you, and so yeah. I think they're helpful, but sometimes they can. I found myself when I'm doing Nation World inside pages, I was going to do 4-1- or something, and then I'm oh wait, no, I'm going to do the news looks better. I'm going to do 4.2 or whatever, and end up switching. And for somebody who doesn't do it a lot, when I do that, it does slow me down a little bit. But
Okay.
for the most part,
If a designer wants to jump into two of the things that I thought, and this was kind of all when we were switching all the stuff all together, so it doesn't happen as much anymore. So I'm not, trying to be a jerk about it. Just I think one of the reasons that we did get to this point was just because when we did switch a lot of stuff, we were getting a lot of web headlines at the time. So there was a lot more when we initially started the pod and started the skeleton idea. There was a lot more back and forth strictly based on, headlines and getting headlines to fit, which we felt was a kind of a production slowdown a little bit. So I know that was one of the things too. And there are certain, a lot of our designers know this now, but there's a lot of sites that do a little bit of different stuff, like Brainerd, for example. They used to want, a 6-column photo, but also 3 stories above the fold and stuff like that. That was just pretty hard to visualize on the fly really quickly on what you needed. So it helped when we would get some of those more difficult A1s to kind of crank that out. I think Brainerd is, in my opinion, the shining example, because we haven't had a lot of necessarily issues with the way they want their pages to look like we used to. So, but yeah, that's just kind of my 2 cents on why they initially started. But I totally agree that if a subhead needs to be killed, it can be taken off. If the pod editor that does that most of the time wants me to just take it off skeleton altogether, I can certainly do that. I just wanted to give more things on there that could be removed because I felt that was easier than kind of adding them back in. So that was the only reason that a lot of those are on there.
Carrie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Personally for me, overall, I really like skeletons. I feel like it makes things a lot easier, but specifically, I know that we've talked about issues with Detroit Lakes, which I feel like their skeletons are just really slowing down everything because, they'll choose a skeleton and then say, oh, but I want to add a photo to position 4 and can you merge 2 and 3? So then, and then they'll also ask to keep headlines and subheads the way they are, but their headline is 50 characters long and their subhead is over 100. So I feel like just specifically with Detroit Lakes, skeletons shouldn't really be a thing, if I had to say so.
Yep, I've brought that up with Alicia a couple times too after I spoke with you about it or saw the three paragraphs of notes that they were requesting. Yep. So yeah, I think that's another one of the things that we'll just kind of have to talk about and see if they make sense, on certain pages, on not other pages, on certain sites and stuff like that. I think that's an okay conversation to have for sure.
All right, out of 17 votes in the poll, which means that some of you didn't vote. 4 people said skeletons are freaking awesome. 12 people said usually helpful, and 1 said sometimes nice. But nobody said not helpful at all. So definitely keeping skeletons. And yeah, like with Detroit Lakes, that's an unusual case. Love to talk through. Are there any improvements or changes that you feel like if we made in how we use the skeletons, that it would make things go smoother?
Aside from more options, because those
Yes.
are definitely coming. Yep. Yeah, and not necessarily like, I don't mean like a training thing, but if anybody wants to have like a conversation with me about like what I maybe would do in a certain situation or how they can be adjusted to help you guys out, I'm free whenever anybody needs, email or Slack, whatever.
this is a designer, I guess, question. I've noticed, let's say the skeleton calls for a character count of 39 characters or 41, 42, whatever. What kind of wiggle room do you normally have? Because sometimes when we're trying to trim heads, you know, you pull that story from the local editor or something, and you know it's 62 characters, and you're like, okay, I got to make that fit 39, so I'll make it into 2 headlines. Blah blah blah. Boy, it calls for 39 characters. I've got 46. Does that work? I mean, what? I mean, what's the ballpark? I guess. What's the ballpark you need to
Yeah.
hit?
Yeah. The thing that I've always tried to do is just kind of say within a workable distance. You know, I know that that doesn't necessarily help very much, but I think the stricter that we make it, kind of the less helpful that they could be. You know, if we say like within 5, and that just turns into be a huge pain. You know, I think of a few characters. I think Matt, your reference was, you know, 10 plus. I think that does make it a little bit difficult. But one of the things that I tried to do in the skeleton books was tell you what size the font was. And the reason I did that was because then if you want to make them a little bit more, the assumption is that the size will go down. You know what I mean? So I think there's just a little bit of like, you know, if it's already 20, you know, that's kind of our design cutoff, you know, roughly. So we wouldn't want it then to go down to 12, for example, you know, and I know there's not necessarily a direct correlation with 1 character equals 1 point size and stuff like that. But I mean, if one of them's 35, for example, you could, you know, go up 6, 7, add a whole nother word, and it would still be within our workable range. Yeah. So that's kind of why I put a lot of those, some of that extra information in that stuff. And I know that's just another thing to think about. And, you know, but I think just a quick glance at, you know, it's 35, so it could take an extra couple characters, or it's already pretty small. Try to keep it within, you know, 5, 6, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I think Aaron was first, and then we'll go to Emily. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think, you know, for Matt, I think the big thing is kind of looking at how much you're adjusting other headlines on that page too. So if you're adding characters to the main headline and then losing characters on a secondary headline, those headlines might get really close in size. You know what I mean? So I think it's just, you know, just be cautious in how much you're adjusting all of those headlines so that they don't start getting all the same size, or that a lower story is going to have a larger headline than the one above it. So
Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to mention, is what Aaron said. And the other thing is, from the questions that I've seen happen in the morning that are significant, like that involve significant cuts or extensions, it's because headlines like break really awkwardly. It's like, okay, so you can either cut this to make it, you know, one less deck, which is a significant cut, or I need it significantly extended to fill the gap that's left by just like how these words work together. So like there's either going to be a question about extending headlines or rewording it so that that gap doesn't happen. So like I don't know how much you guys are, or like the pod is involved with like thinking about that when you're adjusting to skeletons, but I think that's a big part of like what causes need for significant changes, like in character count.
Well,
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
when I do like one deck or one column heads and I have 4, you know, obviously when the story gets downloaded, we don't want to put where we see the breaks, you know, it's 10 characters on one line and it's, you know, whatever, 12 characters on one line. So I generally try to put that in the notes field, like this is how I want it to look. And then, I stretch it out in the main headline on the template there. But I do run into that sometimes too, because you'll run into that where the second deck of a 4-deck headline is just, it's got 4 characters over, and it just looks, that white space there just looks kind of ugly, And so I do that a lot to, I kind of map it out, like, so I can kind of visualize what it looks like on the page in case there's big gaps or something. But yeah, that was just my point.
And one point I wanted to make quick, because I feel like a lot of this is, falling on the pod to make all of this stuff work, and I don't really think that that's necessarily fair. So one of the things, there's a couple of things that we've talked to designers about that I just want to reiterate too, to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page and all trying to make them work together. Like a lot of the centerpiece headlines that I've thrown in there are like all caps, but they don't necessarily have to be. So maybe if they do all caps, but that shrinks the point size down, feel free to take that all caps off so we can make it a little bit bigger, so we don't have to ask for a rewrite when we can make a simple adjustment on our end. Sometimes too, if a word looks better bumped down, but it might not be like that on the budget, like we can take those steps to improve the design on the page, since the pod has already done a lot of that work to help us out too. Obviously conversation's all good and everything like that, but if a lot of the effort was put in ahead of time, we should try to make sure that we're not, doubling back and trying to make a lot of that stuff redone again. I think that's all I had to go over on my list.
I saw Meredith type something in the chat, and I totally agree with you. I think we should definitely be able to access some of those like general rules that you guys have, so that we could just look at that and be like, oh, okay, I can't do that.
Okay.
Even if I wanted to,
Do you guys want access to like our style guide, or some more of just those quick hitter things like that? Like I can put together like a page of some things that are, pretty much straightforward, not necessarily if then situations like we have a lot in our style book. I'm going to try
Maybe
to put
just
together
start with the basics, are the ones that affect like production editor work. Just so that
like
we're
what you-
keeping in mind, yeah, what parameters designers are up against. So we're not trying to tell them to do something that they've been taught not to do, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. Easy. Yep, I can put that together and share out a link. We can put it on. We have like a designer website that's got some style guides. I can put it up there and then share the link out with the people in the pod, so you guys, and we can add stuff as it comes up, if there's stuff that a certain pod editor wants added on there. So
I think even if you start with just like headline stuff, that would be really helpful.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, easy. And then, yeah, just, I guess my final point is just, I agree a lot with what Meredith was talking about earlier. If you don't need a subhead, just tell the designer to pull it off. Any of that stuff's easy. Like I said, I just wanted to have those things there so that, the layout was what the layout was. And then it's just a little bit easier than adding those things back on and pulling them from our libraries and things like that. A simple delete takes us a couple seconds and then we're all ready to go. So if anything needs to be moved, to the other side based on the way the art's facing or anything like that, you guys are all free to make those adjustments, whether it's the pod editor or if that's, if it's given to the designer and, someone's looking right off the page, you can switch the CP and the rail if it's still, going to work out like that. It's just kind of a framework to try to make everybody's job a little bit easier and not get emails and surprises from editors and things like that. So,
Michael, I'm glad that you mentioned like art, particularly for sports, if somebody is pitching to one side or the other. And if that's something that the pod editor misses or doesn't think of, like, I find it really helpful when designers give us feedback also saying this would fit better here. Do you mind if I move this over here or whatever? Like, I want it to be more give and take.
Okay.
So,
yep. And I know that there's some sections. I noticed this just because I did the forum a lot back in the day. So I see some of like the forum skeletons where they like won't have a secondary photo and things like that. And I think just anything that can be just kind of talked about, removed ahead of time so that the designer's not necessarily asking for a second photo or anything like that. Just any little notes that would help us and any little feedback for me if anything needs to get adjusted. Or I have a list from Alicia about ones that are going to be made, so I'm going to take some time and start getting those up there. And when those are done, I'll email Matt, Alicia, designers, and the pod email so you guys can kind of see what's going on with those when I add them to the site for us. So.
And when you do that, like thinking from the designer's perspective, like in our library and stuff, if you could, some of them are in like numerical order, A 1.2 and then 1.3 and that, if that could be, because sometimes I'm like, I don't know where I am, so if that would save me a lot of time at least, because then, I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you about that. I don't know if that is, because I think well, whatever. We can talk about it. I'll make sure that we talk about it later. 'Cause I don't know
Maybe
if
it's just me. I don't know.
No, I don't know if it's a sorting thing in the library or not, but I'll double check because I've tried. But if you see any that aren't in order, just let me know and I'll just quickly switch them up for you.
Will do. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Quick question, Michael.
Yeah.
On the skeletons, there's been a couple times where for Brainerd or something on the more likely the sports pages than a cover. But I have requested like a power headline be used over like what's on the skeleton. Are those still an option, or I haven't seen it happen. It's not a huge deal. It's just sometimes the headline is maybe 1 or 2 words and it's real short and it's centered in the space on the skeleton versus having it be like a power head. Like I know that would like push up or push down maybe some of the text that's on the cover, but it's usually something that we can make work because of jump space or whatever. Is that still an option? Or
I think that's fine. Any suggestions that you guys have? I just didn't necessarily want to put that necessarily on the pod, given all the stuff that I've requested be done before the designer ever touches it. But yeah, any suggestions that you have, I think that's fine. Emma, I know that our style guide and our fonts potentially better than some of the other people with your work on the design side. So yeah, if you have a powerhead suggestion or font suggestion or anything like that, like I think all that stuff fine, and the designers just got to let you know if for some reason the photo's too deep and thus I can't have I can't do this or can't do that. But yeah, cool. I think that's just fine.
I'd just like to say, as a kind of a side note too, to thank you all the pod editors and everything like that. I can't imagine having to kind of be, between the editors and designers and being pulled in all these directions. Like I would probably be bald from like pulling my hair out. So big kudos to you guys. Way to go, Matt. But kudos to you guys. Thank you so much for being patient with us and for doing a really good job and everything. So we appreciate that. So keep up the good work.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, it's and we know and we're trying to answer questions and do the best we can. And I think that's where the skeletons can help, like Ben mentioned, so that we can, so that when you guys do have questions, it's we can pare down the ones we can handle with the skeletons, so that we have more time to deal with the others too.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for your time. Like I said, this is going to be every other week. So if you have anything specific that you feel like we should discuss at upcoming meetings, as always, let me know. I'm here for you. Have a great night.